Hi everyone, Terry here. Um, this morning I have to share with you, this hit me like a ton of bricks. I read a line from that said, not being afraid to be seen trying. And it felt so heavy on me, I'll be honest with you. It provoked even some tears in my eyes, and I was like, whoa, what is this? Like, this is something, there's something here. And so I'm going to read to you some parts of the way that I love to unpack some of these things from a scientific, from a cultural, from through even a gender lens. I even think age generationally has something here that needs to be unpacked. So I'm gonna begin to read to you here some of it. And the title is really not is about not afraid to be seen trying. Why it means and why it's radical. It's a radical act for women, Latinas, and even the bridge generation. Let's start with a cold, harsh truth that I wish someone had said to me earlier in my career, which was trying in public is not embarrassing, it's brave. And for many of us, especially women, especially Latinas, especially the daughters of immigrants, being seen trying is probably one of the most radical things you'll ever do because we were not taught to try in public. We were taught to perform in public, to arrive, not experiment, to be polished, not be in the process of something, to succeed quietly and fail privately, if at all. So when I first heard that phrase, not afraid to be seen, God, it landed on me hard. I felt it like a thud in my chest because for so many years, I have and am still. I also come from the world of television, where, quite frankly, the shit could have been hitting the fan, and you never, ever, ever let the audience know that that was happening. But there is a shift happening in media and in the world that those of us who maybe come from traditional mindsets and have inherited some of these scripts, because they're not just about coming from television, it can also be from being children of immigrants, where we got this passed down for us, being women who weren't necessarily allowed in the room. And when you do get a chance, you just don't have the luxury of failing, right? Or even be seen trying it. At least it doesn't feel that way, right? Whether it's self-imposed and brought out by someone else, that those are two different things. We'll have to ask them. I on my in in my case, I like to look inward because in case it does start with me, then I'm the first. That's the first place we need to work on. So why this phrase mattered? We're in a generational shift, and this phrase is a flag in the ground. It speaks to a very new kind of power, the kind that doesn't hide the climb. It says, I don't have to be fully formed to show up. I don't need a guarantee to begin. I'm not waiting to be picked. I'm already here. It's a phrase that whispers liberation in the face of perfectionism. It's also a phrase that pokes at every fear that I inherited about being enough. Trying versus performing, especially for women and minorities. Not everyone carries the same weight when they're seen in progress. Oftentimes women are judged more harshly for still figuring it out. Oh, she's not ready yet. We're expected to show up prepared, polished, palatable, often from the first try. The having grace to grow, that extends to others, but it doesn't always, we don't give it to ourselves because either A, we don't give it to ourselves and it starts with us, or B, perhaps we have read the room and it doesn't feel like we've been given the grace for that. People with accents and darker skins and non-traditional paths can feel the pressure to prove. I lived this radically. Having not been from Chicago, my accent from Miami shows up more, despite the fact that we spoke English at home in my family because my parents were educated in this country. And whether it was in an act of survival or protection, even, I mean, I remember even telling my staff, hey, we have to be more prepared than anybody else because sometimes we're not even starting from zero, right? And I hate the fact that I'd have to propagate something like that, but it was my way of protecting them to be able to not be seen as less than, right? Um, and so, quite frankly, I had the most amazing team in Chicago. That is the truth. Not only were they well prepared and could have started not from zero, from above, because we over prepared so much for that reason. I mean, that's why I think we had the leadership, and I mean that on the ground as reporters and everything from always. Um, But, we're not always given perhaps the benefit of the doubt. Oftentimes, I tend to say it jokingly, um, but nobody really sees nobody very oftentimes people don't just assume when you walk in the door, oh, here comes the little Hispanic girl. She must be super smart, right? Or at least it didn't feel that way. I could be wrong. Perfectionism is a survival strategy for many of us, especially if you're the first in the room, the only in the room. In my case, I wasn't the first in the room and I wasn't the only in the room. But as we've discussed in other podcasts, we do inherit these scripts and they are, they even inherit, they even are passed down within our DNA. Um, and so you weren't just told to succeed, you were told to succeed without flaw because your failure might reinforce someone else's bias against our entire community, sadly. And I have never had an issue with carrying that weight of wanting to represent and, you know, especially if I was doing things right, then definitely I wanted to represent my community. I surely did not want to represent them if I was failing because I didn't want it to have an adverse effect on them. Many minorities feel the tension of that and even in many cases reject that. I don't, and yet I still feel the pressure, I still felt the enormous pressure, right? So to be seen trying is to admit that I don't know yet. To build something where the outcome is not guaranteed, that is honestly terrifying. It's exactly what needs to be done many times. There's also a generational divide, I notice. This is a bridge we don't walk alone. Let's talk about the bridge generation. I think when I talk about the bridge generation, I I talk both about the Hispanic American with one foot in the Hispanic world and the other one in sort of more American Anglo-Saxon um, world. But in this case, I'm also going to talk about the bridge generation. When you are one foot is in sort of Gen Z and then Gen X, and then the other one is sort of like in Gen Z. I was a late a his a born in 1977, so I am of the bridge generation where I know what it's like not to grow up with technology, with phones and all that other stuff, but thrust in while I was in school into computers and into all of this technology. So I've seen both worlds, right? Um, Gen X was raised to be independent, skeptical, deeply private about ambition. One foot, we're having the other foot in, Gen Z, where vulnerability is currency and building in public is the norm. This is what they did. In fact, I wonder sometimes if perhaps, what many criticize, like, oh, you got an award for trying, was often seen as something negative because it was like, well, you don't win trying, you win winning. Is now caught up to us in some senses that in a good way, right? Where maybe perhaps some of my generation didn't really understand that whole you get a trophy for trying. But now this vulnerability and this currency, that almost radical authenticity that we are seeing show up in social media, like the famous woman I talked about in my last podcast, like the We Don't Care club. Um, is actually that is become a symbol of winning, and they have the numbers and the followers to show that that is the case. And yet for those of us who were not taught to do that, it might be feel very vulnerable and very exposing yourself. And now today it sort of kind of feels like table stakes, right? We're taught that if you try and fail, you should do it quietly. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass your family. So when we see others, especially younger people, posting messy drafts, launching before they're ready, narrating their growth in real time, what's our reaction? By the way, it's not just I'm doing it. With each iteration, I feel that I'm trying to get better as I write and even record, which many of you know I'm not a non-camera person. I like being behind the scenes. Um, in many cases, I have found that maybe I've judged a little harshly some people who do it, and now I'm seeing the value in it. Um, you know, a when you look at it like from that standpoint where we say, let's be honest, sometimes you look at that and you admire people who can just do this. Sometimes we roll our eyes. Sometimes we envy their freedom and resent their lack of fear. Sometimes we judge them. Sometimes we judge ourselves. But what if we paused and asked, what's being triggered in me right now? Is it envy? Is it protection? Is it a version of me that never got to try out loud? Because maybe what looks like oversharing to one generation is actually healing to the next, and in many ways is actually the new norm. The science of trying and why it feels so hard. When you try something new, especially in front of others, your brain flags it as a threat. I've said it over and over again, and I have learned if there's one thing I hope you take away is from this and anything that I'm writing is how we are conditioned to protect ourselves. The brain will always act to try to protect you in order to survive, but that in today's world is not always thriving. So you're activate at that point when you're seeing as a threat, you're activating your amygdala, the brain's fear center, which is scanning for danger. Will I be rejected? Will I be laughed at? Will I lose status, safety, or belonging? It's not just imagined. The fear of public failure lights up the same neural pathways as physical pain or physical danger. Now add on generational trauma or inherited hypervigilance, right? We tend to read the room way too well because we were born that way with antennas, feelers to assess danger and belonging and see how we had to act in that way in order to succeed and to stay safe. Um, that hyper trauma and inherited vigilance isn't just something you create in yourself. Many times, sometimes even your own ancestors who fled war, poverty, political instability, marginalization, they also pass that down to us. It is been proven that these things can and have been passed on along through your DNA. And quite frankly, it's hard to understand. This is why I began some of this work, because it was hard for me to understand that having been born and raised in this country, parents who were practically born and raised in this country, educated in this country, could still have some of those same um, reactions as, you know, immigrants themselves, right? It's not weakness, it's your nervous system, it's doing its job. And what empowered adulthood requires is us learning to tell your body, thank you for protecting me, but now I'm safe and I'm allowed to try out loud. Um, we if inherited hypervigilance, as I mentioned, is real. If your parents or grandparents lived in survival mode, navigating systems where one mistake could cost everything, you may have inherited a hypervigilant lens of life. This is called intergenerational transmission of trauma and well documented in psychology and epigenetics. Research have found that stress responses and trauma markers can be passed down genetically and behaviorally through the family lines. Translation: your fear of getting it wrong in public might not even be yours. It might be your grandmother's or your father's. It might be a script you absorbed without knowing you had a choice, but now you do. Okay, so let's pause now and geek out a little bit for a second. There, what I'm suggesting here is has been backed up by science for many, many years. So um, there is what's called the growth mindset, which people who believe their abilities can grow through effort rather than being fixed are more resilient and more innovative and ultimately more successful. A growth mindset shifts the question from am I good at this to how can I be better at this? When you try in public, you're embodying that mindset. You're modeling resilience, not perfection. And that over time builds the kind of grit and creativity and openness that drive long term growth. The second is social learning theory. We learn by watching others. When someone sees you trying, especially if they see you struggle, adjust, and keep going, it sends a powerful message. If she can, maybe I can too. Effort is contagious and courage can be catalytic. Your willingness to show up visibly becomes a template for someone else who thought they had to wait until they were flawless. So you're welcome. I'm doing it in public. The Franklin effect. Um, this is after Benjamin Franklin, which is counterintuitively when you ask someone for help, and I suggest I spoke about this last time also in the science of networking. Um, podcast, which is when you ask someone for help or let them see your vulnerability, it doesn't make them lose respect for you. It deepens the connection, it activates empathy. Letting others witness your process isn't a loss of power, it's a gain of trust. People don't connect with a persona, they connect with the person. So why this matters for women and minorities, trying in public doesn't land the same way for anybody else. For many women, people of color, and especially those in immigrant rooted families, the pressure to be twice as good, half as visible. La ropa sucia se limpia en casa, right? We say like, don't let them sweat, don't let them see, never be seen, figuring it out, right? Is real. Trying in public can feel risky, like you're opening yourself up to judgment, criticism, or confirmation or someone else's bias. For many of us, the lesson was clear. Don't let them see you sweat. Don't give anyone a reason to doubt you. Don't try. Perform. But trying is humanizing, and in a world driven by curated highlight reels and impossible standards, humanity is magnetic. When we try out loud, we chip away at the myth that the excellence must be effortless, that we show that courage isn't the absence of uncertainty. It's the decision to show up anyway. Trying isn't a liability, it's leadership. It's why I decided that this process had to be done publicly. Because if somebody who has generations of college diplomas in our family, has been here for almost 3 generations. Someone decided we made it, is still feeling this, then it's time we need to be visible about it and break that cycle. From self-protecting to self-expression, when we shift from fearing exposure to embracing evolution, everything changes. Trying publicly is no longer a sign of inadequacy, it's a sign of vision. It says, I believe in something enough to be seen while it's still forming. Welcome to my world. And the people watching, they don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. Especially if you are the first, especially if you are the example. You're not just creating opportunities for yourself, you're rewriting the rules of the next generation and you're giving them a different inheritance. So, what do we do with all this? One, we start by noticing. Next time you see someone trying publicly, imperfectly, maybe even clumsily, pause before you judge. Ask yourself, what does this stir in me? Am I cheering them on or am I cringing on their behalf? What would it feel like to give myself that freedom? And next time you hesitate to take a step because you're afraid someone might see you trying, remember that growth happens in the doing. Mastery is born from iteration, not imagination. No one changes the world without being seen in the middle of a process. Trying out loud is not a trend, it's a healing act. It's a leadership model that I want to embrace because no amount of success to date will guarantee me success later. I'm in the process of iterating. It's a legacy rewrite. And maybe, just maybe, it's the bridge from who we were taught to be to who we were always meant to become. So to every woman, every Latina, every bridge walker, generations and culturally, be seen trying because when you do, you teach the rest of us that it's safe to begin.